Welcome, dear listener, to the Golden Ancient Tales, a quiet place where ancient history, forgotten worlds, and timeless legends unfold gently, perfect for rest, reflection, and peaceful sleep. Tonight's story will carry you far north, across misty seas and whispering forests, to an age of longships and flickering firelight, the Viking Age. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. If you enjoy calm history stories like this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video to support the tales, and leave a comment to tell us where tonight's journey finds you listening from. Now, slow your breathing, let your thoughts drift, and allow the story to begin. Long before the world would come to fear the sound of oars cutting through dark waters, long before sails rose like pale wings against the horizon, the northern lands of Scandinavia existed in a slow, steady rhythm, quiet, patient, and enduring. This was a world shaped by nature's firm hand. Towering forests stretched across the land, filled with pine, birch, and ancient oak. The air carried the scent of damp earth and resin. And in the distance, mountains stood unmoving, their peaks often hidden by drifting clouds. Deep fjords carved their way inland, narrow and still, reflecting the sky like long mirrors of steel-blue water. Here, life followed the seasons closely. Winters were long and demanding, bringing darkness that lasted for months. Snow blanketed the land, muffling sound and movement, while fires crackled softly inside wooden homes. Families gathered close, sharing warmth, stories, and silence. When summer finally arrived, it came gently, but briefly. The sun lingered late in the sky, casting golden light over fields and shores. Crops were planted and harvested with urgency. Fish were dried and stored, and every moment of warmth was cherished. The people of this land were farmers, fishers, and craftspeople. They lived in small settlements near water, where survival depended on cooperation. Homes were built low and sturdy, designed to hold heat and withstand fierce winds. Every object had a purpose, every tool a story of careful making. Yet life was not merely about survival. The northern people believed the world around them was alive. Trees whispered secrets. Rivers carried memory. Storms were not random. They were messages from unseen forces. In the glow of firelight, elders spoke of gods who walked among humans. Odin, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom. Thor, whose hammer defended both gods and people. And spirits that lingered in forests, hills, and sea spray. These beliefs brought meaning to hardship. Fate, they believed, was woven long before birth. But how one faced that fate defined honor and legacy. Children grew up listening to these stories, absorbing lessons of courage, patience, and respect. They learned early that the world could be harsh, but also beautiful, that strength was not only found in battle, but in endurance, loyalty, and quiet resilience. Trade routes slowly connected these settlements. Furs, amber, iron, and crafted goods were exchanged with neighboring lands. Through these encounters came new ideas, new desires, and distant whispers of opportunity beyond familiar shores. The sea, always present, began to feel less like a boundary, and more like an invitation. Each tide brought driftwood from unknown places. Each horizon suggested a world wider than the forests and fields. Boats, once simple fishing vessels, grew more refined, their designs shaped by curiosity and necessity. Still, there was no rush, no great ambition, yet stirred the land. Only a quiet readiness, as if the northern world itself was gathering breath. Unseen, the seeds of transformation were being planted. Within these peaceful villages and silent fjords, a people were preparing, not for conquest, but for discovery. And as the fires burned low and the winds whispered through the trees, history waited patiently for the moment the first longship would push away from shore. The sea had always been there. It breathed softly against the rocky shores of Scandinavia, rising and falling in an endless rhythm that no one could truly ignore. From childhood, the people of the north learned its moods, the calm shimmer of summer mornings, the restless gray of approaching storms, and the deep, echoing silence that followed after. At first, the sea was a provider. Fish filled the waters close to shore, and small boats carried men and women out at dawn, returning before nightfall with their nets heavy and their hands cold. Seals rested on distant rocks. Seabirds circled above, their cries carried on the wind. These early journeys were familiar and cautious, guided by memory and instinct rather than ambition. But over time, familiarity gave birth to confidence. The northern people became skilled shipbuilders, shaping wood with patient hands and sharp tools. Oak trees were carefully selected, felled, and split into long planks. These planks were bent and fitted together, overlapping like scales, creating hulls that were both light and strong. The ships flexed with the waves rather than fighting them, moving as living things across the water. Each vessel was more than a tool, it was a companion. As designs improved, the coastline no longer felt like the edge of the world. Rivers became pathways. Islands became stepping stones. The sea, once feared, now whispered promises of distance and discovery. Young men listened closely to these whispers. So did elders who remembered times of scarcity, when land alone could not provide enough. They spoke quietly of lands where soil was richer, trade was greater, and opportunity waited beyond the horizon. Navigation relied on experience rather than maps. Sailors learned to read the sky, the flight of birds, and the movement of waves. They felt the wind on their faces and trusted the steady pull of the currents beneath them. At night, stars guided their way, scattered like silver across the dark canvas of the sky. These journeys were not yet raids. They were explorations, tentative and curious. Crews sailed along coastlines they had never seen before, anchoring carefully, observing from a distance. They traded when possible, exchanging goods for stories and glimpses of unfamiliar customs. With each return home, tales grew richer. Stories of strange buildings made of stone, of lands where bells rang from tall towers, of markets filled with colors, sounds, and unfamiliar tongues. The sea was no longer silent. It had become a voice. Within the villages, life slowly began to change. Shipbuilding gained new importance. Young people watched closely, eager to learn the craft. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, refined with each voyage. Communities gathered to discuss what lay ahead. Some urged caution, reminding others of the sea's cruelty. Others felt the pull too strongly to resist. The balance between fear and desire shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward movement. Even the gods seemed to approve. Offerings were made before voyages, small but sincere, a carved token, a whispered prayer, a moment of stillness before pushing off from shore. And then, one by one, boats began to sail farther, not driven by violence or conquest, but by necessity and wonder. The world felt larger now, and staying still felt like falling behind. As the sun rose and fell over endless water, something within the northern people awakened, a sense that their future did not lie solely in fields and forests, but across the open sea. The call of the sea was gentle, but it was persistent, and those who listened would soon change the course of history. The dawn came quietly. Mist hovered low over the water, softening the edges of land and sky until the world fell hushed, as if holding its breath. Longships moved through the stillness with barely a sound, their oars dipping to the sea in slow, measured rhythm. To those aboard, this journey felt different from the ones before. They had sailed farther than usual, guided by stories and careful observation. Ahead lay unfamiliar shores, places where stone buildings rose above the land and bells marked the passing of time. These lands were rich, settled, and unprepared for what was about to arrive. When the ships reached the coast, they did not announce themselves. There were no horns, no shouts, only the gentle scraping of wood against shore and the quiet movement of feet upon sand. In the year 793, this silence was broken at Lindisfarne, a small island monastery off the coast of England. Monks who had devoted their lives to prayer and study looked up from their manuscripts in disbelief. The world they knew, predictable and protected, shifted in a single moment. The attack was swift. The Vikings moved with urgency rather than cruelty. They took silver, food, and sacred objects, then returned to their ships as quickly as they had come. To them, it was not an act of senseless destruction, but a calculated risk, a test of possibility. To those left behind, it felt like the end of certainty. Word spread rapidly across Europe. Monasteries and coastal towns trembled at rumors of pale sails appearing without warning. Chroniclers wrote of fire, thunder, and fear, struggling to explain a threat that came from the sea itself. The Vikings, once unknown, now had a name. Yet from a northern perspective, these early raids were not about conquest. They were answers to quiet pressures at home, limited land, growing populations, and a desire for wealth that farming alone could not provide. Each successful voyage returned with more than treasure. It brought confidence. Longships became more numerous. Crews grew bolder. Routes were remembered, improved, and repeated. Raids followed the rhythms of the sea and seasons, appearing in spring and vanishing before winter's grip. Still, life continued as before between these journeys. Villages remained grounded in daily routines. Fields tended, children taught, stories shared by firelight. The raiders were farmers and craftsmen when they returned, carrying both the weight of their actions and the quiet pride of survival. As years passed, the nature of the raids evolved. What began as brief strikes turned into longer stays. Camps were built along foreign shores. Some Vikings overwintered in distant lands, learning the terrain, observing defenses, and imagining something more permanent. Europe, once distant and abstract, was now familiar. The shockwaves of these encounters changed both worlds. Kingdoms strengthened defenses. Churches fortified sacred spaces. And in Scandinavia, success reshaped identity. A new understanding emerged, that the sea did not merely connect lands. It reshaped destinies. The Vikings were no longer simply responding to opportunity. They were becoming a force the world had to reckon with. Yet even as fear grew abroad, within the longships there was calm. The sea remained steady beneath them. The stars still guided their way home. And fate, as always, wove silently onward. The world had awakened to the Vikings. And the Vikings, in turn, were only beginning to discover who they would become. Beneath the vast northern sky, belief was not something distant or abstract. It lived in the wind that bent the trees, in the thunder that rolled across the mountains, and in the quiet moments between heartbeats. For the Vikings, the world was alive with meaning. They did not imagine their gods as far away. The gods walked close to human life, present in storms, journeys, and choices made in silence. Every success and every loss carried a deeper story, shaped by unseen forces. At the center of these beliefs stood Odin. Odin was not a god of comfort, but of wisdom earned through sacrifice. He gave up an eye in exchange for knowledge and hung upon the world tree, Yggdrasil, seeking the secrets of runes. To the Vikings, he represented the restless pursuit of understanding, the idea that true insight demanded courage and loss. Then there was Thor, beloved and familiar. Thor was strength made simple and protective. His hammer, Mjolnir, was carried as an amulet, worn close to the heart. It was a symbol of safety, fertility, and balance. When thunder echoed across the sky, people did not panic. They felt reassured, believing Thor was guarding the world from chaos. Frey and Freya embodied gentler powers. Frey brought peace, harvest, and prosperity. Freya ruled love, beauty, and sorrow, welcoming half of the fallen warriors into her own hall. Through them, the Vikings acknowledged that life was not only about battle, but also about growth, desire, and grief. Above all, these beliefs shaped how the Vikings understood fate. They believed fate was woven by the Norns, three beings who shaped the past, present, and future. No one could escape destiny, not even the gods themselves. Yet what mattered most was how one faced that destiny. Fear was natural. Cowardice was not. This philosophy brought a quiet strength to everyday life. When storms destroyed crops or illness claimed loved ones, people did not ask why it happened. They asked how to endure with honor. Death, too, was seen differently. It was not an ending, but a crossing. Those who lived bravely might reach Valhalla, where they would feast and train until the final battle of the gods. Others would find peace in calmer realms, free from suffering and fear. These ideas softened the sharpness of loss and gave meaning to struggle. Belief was practiced not in grand temples, but in small rituals. Offerings of food, carved symbols, whispered prayers before journeys. Sacred groves and stones held quiet power. The natural world itself served as a place of worship. Runes, carved into wood or stone, carried both sound and spirit. They were used for memory, protection, and guidance. Each mark was deliberate, shaped with intention and care. Children grew up surrounded by these stories. They learned not only who the gods were, but what they represented: wisdom, strength, balance, and acceptance. Through storytelling, belief passed gently from one generation to the next. Even as Vikings travel far from home, their gods travel with them. In foreign lands, beneath unfamiliar stars, they still whispered the same prayers and trusted the same fate. This spiritual framework was the heart of the Viking soul. It gave courage to sailors facing endless sea. It gave peace to farmers enduring harsh winters. And it gave meaning to a life shaped by uncertainty. As the world around them expanded, these beliefs remained steady, a quiet compass guiding them through darkness and light alike. Beyond the familiar coasts and well-remembered routes, the world opened slowly, not all at once, but horizon by horizon. The Vikings did not set out believing they would change history. They sailed because the sea kept offering more questions than answers. Each voyage returned with new knowledge, and each new piece of knowledge invited another journey. To the west lay open water, vast, cold, and uncertain. Here, the sea felt heavier, the wind more insistent. Yet the longships moved steadily onward, rising and falling like living creatures, their wooden frames flexing gently beneath the pressure of the waves. The first great western discovery was Iceland, a land of fire and ice, where steam rose from the earth and lava fields stretched beneath endless skies. The Vikings found grassy valleys sheltered from the wind, places where farms could take root. Though the land was harsh, it offered freedom, space to begin again. Families followed the explorers. Homes were built. Laws were established. Stories were shared beneath unfamiliar stars. From Iceland, curiosity pushed them farther still. Beyond the edge of the known sea lay Greenland, a colder, quieter land where ice dominated the horizon. Settling there required endurance and patience. Life was fragile, shaped by long winters and limited resources, but communities endured for generations, bound together by shared effort and resolve. And beyond Greenland, the world revealed something unexpected. Across the ocean lay a place of forests and flowing rivers, a land rich with timber and life. The Vikings called it Vinland. Those settlements that were short-lived, the journey itself marked something remarkable. Humans crossing oceans long before the world believed it possible. To the east, the voyages were no less extraordinary. Rivers became roads. Longships traveled deep into what is now Russia and Eastern Europe, connecting northern villages with distant empires. Vikings traded furs, amber, honey, and iron for silver, silk, and spices. They were known there as Varangians, respected not only as traders but as warriors and guards. Some served foreign kings and emperors, walking halls far removed from the wooden homes of their youth. These journeys changed the Vikings in quiet ways. They encountered new religions, unfamiliar customs, and distant cultures. They brought home stories that expanded the imagination of those who had never left their villages. The world grew larger in the telling. Yet despite these distant travels, the Vikings remained deeply connected to home. No matter how far they sailed, the rhythm of seasons still guided their lives. Winter drew them back. Summer carried them outward again. Exploration became a cycle: departure, discovery, and return. Navigation relied on deep observation, the color of water, the shape of clouds, the presence of birds far from shore. Some believed special stones helped find the sun through clouds, though certainty mattered less than trust and experience. Each journey required courage, but also patience. Storms were endured, not fought. Losses were accepted, not forgotten. The Vikings did not name themselves explorers. They were simply following paths that unfolded naturally before them. Yet through these quiet acts of movement, they connected continents and cultures long before the modern world existed. Their exploration was not driven by domination, but by a desire to understand what lay beyond the horizon. And with every sail raised against the sky, the unknown world became just a little more familiar. The world of the Vikings was not all longships, raids, and distant voyages. Away from the open sea and the roar of battle, life moved with quiet rhythm, soft, ordinary, and full of small wonders. Villages clung to the edges of fjords, rivers, and valleys, nestled against forests that stretched beyond the eye. Here, homes were made of wood and thatch. low to ground, their walls thick enough to hold heat against long winters. Smoke curled gently from chimneys, carrying the scent of fish, bread, and warm firewood into the crisp northern air. Inside, families lived closely together. Children played on straw-covered floors, learning to weave baskets, carve wood, or care for animals. Each child was taught the ways of survival from the very beginning: how to read the signs of weather, how to mend nets, and how to listen to the stories that connected them to gods, ancestors, and the land itself. Women held a quiet but powerful role in these villages. They managed homes, supervised farms, and sometimes even defended property in their husband's absence. Some women owned land, carried weapons, or guided legal disputes, balancing strength with the patience of daily care. Life required everyone to contribute, and respect often followed competence rather than status alone. Men, too, had their responsibilities beyond sailing and fighting. They farmed fields, repaired tools, tended livestock, and maintained the intricate networks of trade that allowed their communities to survive. Every task was shaped by precision and understanding, from building sturdy boats to weaving warm clothing that would last a long winter. The rhythm of the seasons defined their lives. Spring brought planting and hope, summer brought growth and abundance, autumn brought harvest and preservation, and winter brought reflection and endurance. With each cycle, families gathered to tell stories, celebrate small victories, and honor the gods with quiet offerings. Life was woven into the land and water, as much as the wind and sky. Yet the Vikings were never idle in mind. Even in everyday work, their curiosity and imagination shaped their world. Markets brought travelers and traders with strange tongues and goods. Craftspeople experimented with metal, wood, and textiles. Songs were composed and passed along, carrying lessons of courage, wisdom, and humor through generations. Storytelling was as vital as food. It preserved memory, taught values, and inspired dreams. Community gatherings marked significant moments. Feasts followed harvest or successful voyages, where meat, bread, and mead were shared. Laws were pronounced at open assemblies, sometimes with music, sometimes with solemnity, but always with participation from all who were able. Decisions were made collectively, reminding everyone that survival was intertwined. Religion, too, remained a quiet companion in daily life. Offerings were left in groves, small runes carved into wood. Prayers whispered to unseen powers. Even children learned that the natural world held spirits in every tree, rock, and river, and that courage and honor mattered in both small deeds and great adventures. It was a life of contrasts: hardship and beauty, labor and storytelling, silence and music. The Vikings laughed, argued, sang, and dreamed. They endured storms and celebrated sunshine. They were shaped not only by the longships they built or the lands they raided, but by the ordinary hours of quiet work, reflection, and connection with one another. This was the foundation of their world, the heart of their culture that often went unseen in tales of conquest. It was here, in the simple rhythm of daily life, that the Viking spirit was nurtured, resilient, observant, and deeply human. And as the northern winds blew softly through forests and fjords, life continued much as it always had: steady, purposeful, and quietly extraordinary. The Vikings were not only warriors and explorers. They were people living fully in every moment, grounded in a world both familiar and alive with unseen possibilities. Time, like the sea, moves steadily and quietly, even when it is barely noticed. For the Vikings, centuries of exploration, raiding, and settlement did not end abruptly, but rather slowed gradually, as the world around them changed in ways both subtle and profound. By the late 10th and early 11th centuries, the northern lands were transforming. Kingship grew stronger, replacing the loose network of chieftains who had once guided local communities. Laws were codified, alliances formalized, and settlements grew more permanent. The free-roaming, adventurous spirit that had driven so many voyages now encountered new boundaries. Religion, too, shifted the rhythm of life. Christianity spread slowly across Scandinavia, carried by missionaries, merchants, and returning travelers. The old gods, Odin, Thor, Frey, and Freya, were not forgotten overnight, but their voices were joined and sometimes replaced by the call of new beliefs. Wooden temples and sacred groves began to give way to stone churches, and rituals that had defined centuries became quieter, woven into new patterns of faith. Despite these changes, the Viking way of life did not vanish completely. Families continued to farm, craft, and trade, maintaining traditions passed down through generations. Longships still floated in fjords, but voyages were increasingly for trade and diplomacy rather than sudden raids. The sea remained vital, but the thrill of unknown shores was tempered by practical needs and political realities. Europe, too, had learned from Vikings. Fortifications were stronger, towns better defended, and distant kingdoms more aware of the northern visitors who had once arrived silently on the wind. This awareness made raiding more difficult, and the era of surprise attacks slowly waned. Some Vikings adapted by becoming settlers, soldiers, or merchants in distant lands. In England, Ireland, and Normandy, they intermarried, built towns, and shaped new communities. In the East, Varangians served foreign rulers, guarding palaces and trading along rivers that connected them to distant empires. The Viking spirit lived on in these quiet forms of influence, far from the battlefields and fjords of home. Yet even as these transformations took hold, the stories of adventure did not fade. They lived in sagas, carved in runes and whispered in fireside tales. Children learned of Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, and the daring journeys across the seas. Memory preserved the excitement of voyages, the lessons of courage, and the pride of a people who had reached far beyond what seemed possible. The final decades of the Viking Age were not marked by defeat or collapse, but by integration. The restless energy that had once sent longships across oceans began to blend into the rhythms of settled life. Farmers, warriors, and sailors became citizens, nobles, and merchants, shaping the medieval world that followed. And yet, in quiet moments along fjords or on cold northern mornings, the old songs could still be heard. A hammer struck against iron. A story was told beside a hearth. The wind carried echoes of the past, reminding everyone that the Viking Age, though ending in action, would live on in spirit. It was a slow and gentle transition, like the evening fading into night. The longships no longer ruled the seas in the way they once had, but their legacy drifted through time, leaving mark after mark on lands, languages, and cultures far beyond Scandinavia. In the end, the Viking Age concluded not with thunder or fire, but with quiet reflection, a people adapting, a world evolving, and a spirit enduring. The era of long voyages, fierce courage, and restless exploration had come to a close, but its stories, lessons, and echoes of bravery would continue to drift across fjords, rivers, and oceans, carried forever in the imagination of the world. Even though the Viking Age had passed, its presence lingered quietly, like a soft echo across the fjords, forests, and seas. Long after the last longship slipped from the horizon, its impact endured, in stories, names, laws, and the spirit of exploration that never truly faded. The villages of Scandinavia adapted, yet the rhythm of life still carried traces of the past. Families remembered the voyages of their ancestors. Crafts, songs, and tales passed through generations, weaving memory into the fabric of everyday life. A child listening to a story of Odin or Thor might not yet grasp the vastness of their world, but the values embedded in those tales, courage, cleverness, endurance, remain alive and quietly influential. Even in lands far from the northern fjords, the Vikings left marks that time could not erase. Cities like Dublin, York, and Novgorod grew from settlements they established. Roads, trade routes, and marketplaces bore traces of their early ingenuity. Names of towns and rivers still echo the sound of Norse words, reminding us that history is not only written in books, but in the places where people live, speak, and walk. Their spirit of exploration also survived, not in conquest alone, but in curiosity and adaptability. The Vikings had seen distant lands, faced storms and strangers, and returned with knowledge, goods, and stories. That restless energy inspired future generations, reminding humans that the world is vast and full of opportunities for those willing to journey beyond the familiar. And yet, the echoes of the Viking Age were subtle. They were not loud, brash, or violent in this stage of history. They live in the quiet courage of daily life. The farmer tilling a field, the sailor reading the stars, the storyteller passing on wisdom to a child. These echoes reminded people that strength, honor, and resilience are not only proven in battle, but in persistence, learning, and connection to land, sea, and community. Art, language, and culture also carried the Viking heritage forward. Carved runes, intricate jewelry, and preserved sagas became bridges between the past and the present. Even as new religions and governments took hold, these pieces of memory reminded everyone that human life is built not only on what exists now, but on the foundation laid by those who came before. The natural world, too, held memory. Fjords, forests, and rivers remained unchanged in their quiet majesty, carrying the whispers of longships and oars, of distant drums and songs sung beside hearths. When the wind moved through pine trees or waves lapped softly on the shore, it was easy to imagine the distant past, a people who traveled, explored, and lived in harmony with their environment, aware of both its beauty and its danger. And so, the Viking Age did not vanish. It became part of the world itself, existing in the spaces between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Its lessons of courage, resilience, curiosity, and honor remain timeless. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine a calm northern fjord under a twilight sky. A longship rests in the distance, sails furled, oars still. Waves lap gently against the shore. Somewhere, a story is being told, echoing across time. The Viking Age is past, but its echoes remain. They live in memory, in culture, in the quiet strength of human spirit, waiting for each new listener to hear them once more. And in this gentle quiet, you too can feel a part of that history, connected to the past, to the sea, to the stories, and to the enduring spirit of the Vikings. Sleep now, and let the echoes carry you across the fjords and into dreams, where history is alive, endless, and timeless.